Greetings and welcome to today's podcast. I am Nick Koukis and I have the honor of sitting in for Arun today. Joining me today is Zara. Today we're tackling one of the most transformative and perhaps the most threatening technology of our time, artificial intelligence. So let me turn over to Zara for a quick introduction, please.
Hi, yeah. Thank you so much, Nicholas. It's really cool to be here. I'm such a fan of this podcast. I'm Zara. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Overwatch Data. We're a threat intelligence, and we use AI in every piece of what we do. And so I've always been interested in this field. I was previously working at Google's threat analysis group, and then at Google Assistant. And I think I on the building side, I've always been passionate about how we can use AI to improve our cyber defenses. But then as we look throughout the threat landscape, it's been really interesting seeing how many threat actors are using AI to empower their offense. So really interested in this topic and looking forward to discussing more.
Thank you so much. I want you to know that I'm a big fan of yours. I follow you on LinkedIn, and you have a very impressive background. So absolutely my honor today to get a chance to speak with you. So if you don't mind, let's take a crawl, walk, run approach to today's topic. So let me just scroll on down here. In the probably the most simplistic way, what exactly is AI and what kinds of human thinking, like skills of making decisions, are these computer systems trying to copy? Everyone hears these buzzwords: AI is going to take my job, AI is going to do this. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is AI?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and I think there's many answers to it. I think in general, artificial intelligence, in comparison to the previous era of software programming, is just the idea that the computer will learn what decisions it needs to make from data instead of you telling it step by step, like what are the step by step instructions it should do. And then that takes so many forms. So I think when we think about AI, that's the fundamentals. But then I think a lot of times today we're talking about colloquially like generative AI, which can be used for thinking or text generation and all these things. But the basic premise is that artificial intelligence is just mimicking human intelligence. It is passing the Turing test when it can successfully act as a human would. And the idea is that it learns sort of the way we do, where it learns from data. It doesn't need step-by-step instructions for every single action.
I like that. And let's keep with that crawl phase. A lot of people didn't hear about AI until late 2024, sometime in the middle. Even this year, there was the AI boom, if you will, where Chat GPT became the key word and the buzz and the fear and everything. But really, AI kind of took off back in 2012. Can you kind of chat about that just a little bit about the why did it take so long to get from 2012 to 12, 13 years later?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it's interesting because AI and even things like neural networks are we started in the 1980s. So, in some of these, many of the technologies we're talking about, the initial ideas and the initial principles have been around for a really long time. The difference is that we're now, we optimize some of how we do it, and there's a lot more data and a lot more compute we're throwing at it. I think around 2012, there's, a lot of innovations in deep learning and deep neural networks, things like AlexNet, where the convolutional network could understand like imagery in a way that was really remarkable at the time. And then we've been since several evolutions since then. So I think another thing I remember is around like 2017 or so, there's a big breakthrough in transformers. And so when you're looking at tools like Google Assistant that's understanding text or these image understanding models, suddenly they could be trained a lot more efficiently. So as the compute resources became better, we were able to leverage all that information and really shove it into these deep models that try to abstract more and more information. And that matters because they start to generalize. They start to generalize understanding of like what does this mean or what are the base principles behind it versus just trying to do one problem at a time. And so that was another really big breakthrough around 2017 where suddenly we're like seeing like we're able to train more models more efficiently and throw more data at it. And then there's this next step that was, when ChatGPT launched, it was another huge breakthrough because there we took transformer models, but we reframed the question a little bit. So we said instead of learning a specific prediction problem, just predict the next word in the text. Which sounds like now with hindsight, you're like, oh yeah, that's obvious because it has a lot of really cool properties. You can use all the data from the internet because you don't have to train labeled data. You can say just take all the data there is and predict the next word, which makes the curation process and setting up the problem a lot simpler. And then by throwing that, like what happens if you optimize your neural networks a little bit and how we train, but you really just throw more and more data and more compute at it, it had this really interesting sort of like emergent properties where we learned that the understanding of first principles and how it was able to abstract the understanding of the world was way bigger and better than what we expected.
You said something, and I want to kind of build upon that. What are some of the more impressive ways we're using AI? Coming from the cyber field, we look at cyber in, I'm not going to say a singular lens because it's not, but we work at it, we work with it in our particular field. So what are some of the more impressive things? Let's talk about just outside cyber, maybe self-driving cars and how AI formulates those. What are some of the other things and ideas that AI is taking off from outside cyber?
I think I love this question so much because I think, especially working in our field, like we have both excitement and we have skepticism, but it's very colored by us being experts in our own field. A few weeks ago, I was at a conference in San Francisco, and where I live in Boston, we don't have self-driving cars to that extent, but I got to drive in a Waymo, and it was crazy just seeing it was navigating the city perfectly. It was cutting in and out of traffic. They've become more confident as drivers, maybe not confident enough for Boston traffic, but they've become more confident. And it's honestly remarkable seeing how they're able to navigate so many problems from like detecting the objects to figuring out the path that they should go on. And I think that one is, to me, it like has that crazy wow factor is when you sit in the front seat of a Waymo with no driver. You start to understand, we're like, wow, these are really starting to just do actions in the real world without supervision. Another thing I think is interesting, and I don't know as much about this field, but I think there's a lot of really interesting developments in biology. So using it to understand how genetics, like the impact of different genes, the impact of proteins, protein modeling. And I think some of the breakthroughs that they're using of similar sequence to sequence models like we use in text, but using that for understanding proteins and genetics and using that to more efficiently model whether it's drug creation or model diseases. I think that's a really interesting and honestly really exciting and very impactful area or application of AI.
I think biomed, I think that's where we're going to see the biggest boom when it comes to AI. The processing, everything, just like you talked about with the proteins. I think that that's probably the biggest. I think that that probably won't be as pronounced as the things that we're going to see in our daily lives. You brought up self-driving cars. One of my favorite comedians, John Christ, does a video of him getting calling a Waymo, getting in the car, and showing his reaction. And I really do believe that if you don't get a chance to watch, if you haven't watched the video, it's really funny. But I do believe that it's probably the same reaction, same excitement, same worry, same concerns you had the first time you got in a car that was self-driving, where it's fascinating, but there's some hesitancy when you get in the back seat, front seat of a self-driving car when you get that. So let's shift gears a little bit. We're going to get into the walk phase. Let's start talking about nation states and cyber criminals, if you will. Well, we're talking about, someone who's doing, we'll talk about good or talk about bad, whatever someone's motivation is. What are some of the risks that we're going to see? Well, we're going to see, but we're seeing now as well in the future when it comes to AI with cyber criminal activity.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because there's so many applications of in general AI application is so broad. AI application for crime is also incredibly broad. And then even if we limit ourselves to cyber crime, there's still a huge range and a huge range of threat actors. So I think we see there's the full spectrum of you see like nation states. Like I know there's this big like Anthropic threat intel report talked about the North Korean APTs that are doing things like deep fakes for IT workers, applying to companies, trying to look at employment fraud. You see in between where you see either sophisticated APTs using AI to maybe diversify their malware, research their victims, or sort of just generally scale their operations. But I think one of the things I find most interesting is the effect on reducing the barrier to entry for sort of entry level fraud and cybercrime. And then also how it's making that uh, initial sort of easy to commit cybercrime much more effective. So I think when I think about stuff like that, it's like previously we had this era of if you're going to go carry out fraud, you have to maybe you're familiar with Tor, you're joining dark web communities, you're understanding how that works, you have usually some technical background, and then and this isn't always true, but often with that technical background, the motivations were more about like being curious or figuring out what you could break. And then now, because it's easier and easier to just learn how to carry out fraud, learn how to carry out cybercrime, you don't need a technical background. You can just get started and ask the chatbot how to write the code that you need. It's making it so much more accessible for so many more groups of people to carry out fraud and cybercrime. And it's also making them a lot more impactful in that what they can carry out is more personalized, it's more nuanced, it's very targeted. And it's also it spans across geos. So I remember like used to be that like we get these very badly translated or badly worded
Yeah.
phishing messages, and now it's like so much more natural sounding. So I think that's one of the things I think about a lot more. In some ways, more so than the APTs, like the big organized groups.
How fast that particular part of AI, how that's growing is, to me, it's absolutely fascinating. Another shameless plug, Notebook LM is a great AI tool that I like to use. And just a click of a button with all your information, it'll create a podcast. It'll create a webcast for you as well with graphics, within 10 or 15 minutes, which, in our field, sometimes we're fascinated by the little things. And that's a big thing that was pretty fascinating when I was turned on to that not too long ago. So let's kind of shift gears just a little bit when we talk about AI and voice fingerprinting and voices and faces. You alluded to it earlier about the North Korean deepfakes and such. Can you explain a little bit more detail about those deepfakes? And if you're familiar with a case where a company in Hong Kong lost $35 million due to a deepfake with voice fingerprinting or voice deepfakes.
Yeah, so for sure. And I'm familiar with the outlines of that, so I'll talk to
Yeah.
the general idea,
Yeah.
but I'll leave some of the specifics to someone else. But I think that what's happening in deepfakes and voice clones is interesting. Like we have when you think about the basic functionality that AI is being used for, it's for text generation, image generation, video, audio creation, but it also can understand and also can edit all of those things. So we see a range of different types of deepfakes being generated for different purposes. I think the basic way, I think, to your point on things like scams, like transfer scams, like I'm going to try to get someone to transfer money, or things like traditional phishing of just like click this link and I'll steal your credentials and then go use that to take all of your money. With if people want to put in a little bit more effort, like they put in almost no effort, they get text generation like SMS text messages. If they put in a little bit of effort, they're doing things like taking someone's TikTok videos,
Yeah.
turning them into a clone of their voice, and then calling their grandmother and saying like I'm in the hospital, I need you to transfer money. And that is so much different in how it feels and how kind of accurate it is and how much it sounds like the person that you know and trust, that the effectiveness of that compared to like the badly wording phishing emails is just way different. And I think in this case, so if I remember this correctly, so what happened here is they took the likeness of a CFO of their company, they transformed it into a video of that. And what they did is there's a technique, and you find this a lot in like the Telegram or dark web forums, as they talk about the face swapping. So what they'll do is if I'm here, they'll have a model that is trained that transfers my face to a fake ID that I've generated. It's usually a synthetic photo, but it could be a real person. In this case, they take the real person of the CFO and they transfer it onto me. So then as I'm talking, it looks like I am alive, I'm interactive, I'm the face that you know. And I believe in this case, it's like, they don't tell you why it happened. And we don't know all the details here, but from other cases, I think this is incredibly effective because it's someone that is very impactful. Like it's really hard to tell the CEO or the CFO of your company no. And then it looks enough like them, and you've seen them before, where you're kind of passes that test. You're like, this, like if I see it, I believe it. And then they're passing all those other liveness tests where you can see it's a real person who's responding to what you're saying. And so having that is a very different paradigm of trust, and it kind of exploits that like the human feeling of like, oh, I trust this, and instead of getting back to the things that we would love to see in identity of like ask them for something they have and something they know. So like it's a kind of a new attack on a very old problem, which is how do you uh,
So
Hey, sorry guys, I don't know what happened.
Some of those cases where someone had information about ask the CEO some questions about that only the CEO would know. So completely understand how they would fall for that. And then to kind of recover just a little bit, we've recommended to HR some questions. There's five figures, a show an ID card, something that a threat actor may not be aware of, or prepared to answer when they're on video, or keep it grainy and stuff. So, it's challenging to stay ahead of the criminal actors when they're doing certain things. So, completely understand how complex this problem is, and this is just one small part of the big AI complex there. We talked about this briefly about how easy it is to lower the barrier for a cyber criminal. If you have someone that's taken a college class, or some really smart young folks these days, 12, 13, sometimes even younger, how is AI helping them do some nefarious things, or some things that they shouldn't partake in?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question, because I think, well, you sort of just brought it up in your answer here of like that knowledge of like, can you research all your victims and do
Mm-hmm.
that at scale and in real time? And I think that's a really interesting point that I'll try to make my way back to. But I think it's interesting because the learning aspect of AI is I think really interesting, because if you think about how we use ChatGPT, where I might ask like how does, I don't know, quantum computing work, or tell me how to I don't know, fill out this form. And so many of these things just become accessible at your fingertips, where you don't have to learn or really invest a lot of on time understanding that. And that also applies for the cybercrime ecosystem. So there are some of these like sort of jailbroken or fine-tuned off-brand GPTs, or even just like the uncensored GPTs that will answer questions about direct with intent to carry out fraud. So they'll help people figure out who to attack, how to attack them. They'll help them write the code for their scam pages. And they sort of act as that like sort of partner to get involved in cybercrime and fraud, which is just, it reduces barriers to entry, both in sort of like technical skill set, but also even like how to even get started, or where do you look, which I think makes it so much easier for people who are otherwise maybe had motive but not the means to just get started in the space.
So let's stay with that crawl walk phase. Let's say someone's new to AI. Someone gets a new telephone, and all of a sudden Gemini pops up on their screen, and they hear about AI. They've never really played with it. What are some things that you would suggest to the normal user when it comes to AI? I'll share mine real quick. I was like, oh, AI is a fun little tool. Let me see. Let me take a picture of my dog. Okay, let me put my dog in a Santa hat. Now let me see if my dog can sing a song. I know those are very basic, very funny. At least it was to me. And then just kind of take that crawl walk phase with AI, introducing yourself to it, and to keep yourself interested, send them on, to social media and say, look at my funny dog with a Santa hat and a pipe in his mouth sitting by the fireplace. You really didn't do anything. All you did was type it in, and AI generated, but then it produces thought. Oh, if I can do this, so what are some of the things that you would introduce somebody brand new to AI, and not jump into the deep end of the pool of cyber criminality, if you will?
I think honestly, I think this point is so important, because with today's models, they do more than what the authors expected them to
Yeah.
do. Which for me, like I can read all this stuff about transformers, but nothing is a replacement for just using it yourself, and it gives you so much intuition, whether you want to use it for fun, for making your own life better, to understand how criminals are using it. So I absolutely love the question, and I think thinking about how we use it for fun. My favorite thing right now is, I think Gemini has a feature called storybooks. And you put in a
Okay.
simple prompt and you can upload some photos, and it'll generate a short story that's sort of designed for kids. And I find this is like, even for people who are AI skeptics, this is really fun, and it's so personal. And it's in many ways like, by telling like you what you give it, if you can give it and become something that's like very personal to you. I made a story about my dog and his obsession with cats, and he's always trying to make cat friends, and he's a giant German shepherd, so that doesn't always go so well for him, but he loves them. And I think that's a really fun way to understand how an AI agent works. So that's always one place to get started. I think another thing is, playing around with Gemini or ChatGPT on asking questions, having it like think about like editing, brainstorming is always interesting. But I also think another fun one that I found that a lot of people may not be thinking of is you can also generate songs. So there's a tool called Suno, and if you put lyrics in, it'll generate music for you. So I made one recently that was like an anti-phishing, like don't click the link type of thing. But there's a lot of really fun, and they're pretty good. They're pretty interesting or fun songs. So I think that's another one I would suggest people play around with.
So I'm going to throw a kind of a curveball at you. AI, would you agree with this, that it may slow down imagination but increase curiosity? So you brought up a great point. I can put in some photos and I can ask Gemini to, hey, create a story. So my imagination of creating that story has slowed down because AI did it for me. But now my curiosity is, I built a story. Now I can ask it to continue to build upon.
I haven't heard that before, but I think it's an incredible framing, and a really something I think about a lot is like, what does this do to us?
Mhm.
Because obviously I love to use it, and I also think it does change things about that. I think I do find myself being much more curious because it's so easy. Like you can prototype anything. Like if you have an idea for an anti-phishing game, you can make it in an afternoon. If you have an idea for how your website should look, you can make that in an afternoon. And so like it gives you like that really easy way to test something and see if this is sort of what you wanted, or sort of get that idea in your head in some real world example. And if I do find what you said, like there's sort of like multiple hurdles, but that next step of like, are you going to stick with it? Like, are you really going to understand how this works, or is it going to be something else and you're just like playing? I think is an interesting barrier because we find that a lot in software, and like when you write like production software, you need to understand how that works, regardless of like if the AI wrote it and you don't understand it, you can't submit it. Like you need to understand how that works.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's an interesting question of thinking about like what are the areas where you want to push and dig deep and actually know every step, and what are the things that are like maybe not your area of expertise or something you don't like to do that you just want to just do the curious part and then call it quits.
I hope that there's something that will replace that. I think that the imagination might get slowed, but something else will inspire that imagination part. And curiosity is individually based. Hey, I can do this. Can I see if I can do that? Going from the, oh, I can put my dog into this picture, and then kind of doing some different faces. So let's get in some of the run phase right now when it comes to training. You know, eh, Unfortunately, human beings are always going to be the weak link into things. It's not a slam or a derogatory term. Everybody knows that when it comes to human intervention, that's where probably the weakest link when it comes to cyber. What are some of the trainings that we can ask people to take, or some of the things, some courses, not really, courses like a college class or a certification, but some ideas on training on how to spot some different things in AI?
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I know, like there's a lot of people have this very top of mind, and from a corporate setting, like a lot of people are looking at risk frameworks, so like NIST AI and stuff like that, and they recommend things like AI training, where you teach your employees like how it works, the different types of risks, like it could hallucinate, it could like how where is your data going when you put it into an AI, and so I think that's sort of like a basic training from a corporate setting. I think one thing I think about, and I just saw some article last week, so you should look at this up yourself. But it was talking about how a lot of times, like things like phishing training, just aren't that effective because you take this corporate training, everyone zones out, and then when you're actually hit by something, you're not expecting it, you don't have this top of mind. So one thing I've been thinking of, and I think it might actually fit as a positive use of AI, is can we is are there ways that we can make that more intuitive and more gamified? So I think to some extent we all like as you said, like if we are playing with AI, we're sort of more familiar of what it can do. So if you have seen a robot that chats to you very naturally, then when you get a text message and it like sort of knows who you are and where you work, you might not trust it because it didn't come from your family member. So I think there's some interesting ideas of like ways we could do better there. But I think the basics are thinking about like sort of what is the shape of how AI works, how does it interact, and then the data security questions of like, are you sure, like, do you know where your data is going, depending on which AI you picked.
Completely agree. And technology is going to help technology. We you're absolutely correct. Cyber criminals are getting much better when it comes to a phishing email that may come in. Some are getting better throwing in an AI, rewording it and sending it out. And you have to depend upon a lot of the tools to a certain extent at that point to be able to identify that is in fact a phishing email. I heard kind of a small pivot when it comes to social media and AI's use. You and I are having this conversation right now. If you and I are both on Facebook, there's a possibility that my phone is picking up this conversation. Your voice may be in a dead database, and now it's going to suggest that you and I are friends. There was a case once where one of the professional cyber let me spit this out again. A One of the cybersecurity professionals was posed this question, and the answer basically was, why is it that when I look at a recommended friend on Facebook, I've never met this person, we have zero in common. Why are we being suggested as friends? And one of the proposed answers was, you guys both seem to go to Costco at the same time, every Tuesday or Wednesday, or you seem to always be at Costco, and it looks and says, okay, well, you're at Costco 3 times a week. This person is at Costco 3 times a week. You're both at the same place. Maybe you guys should be friends. So when you get those Facebook suggestions and that says, hey, you and Arun should be friends, or Zara should be friends, or some complete stranger, there is an algorithm and AI based that's suggesting that friendship. I can't disagree with that theory because I can't say that theory is wrong or right. So with that, what are your thoughts on that?
I also have no idea on if that's
Yeah.
wrong or right for Facebook. So I'll caveat, but I have the same question because I'm like, if you think about that example, like maybe they listen to your conversation. Sure, there's like a huge confirmation bias where you're only noticing it when it does
Mm-hmm.
happen. But I'm like, to me, like, what if it's not? So what if it's understanding what you do, what your interests are, what you're connected to, what they're doing, and what their interests are, and what they're piecing that in together to understand exactly like what you're interested in. And that's to me, like, I think that that's really it's like maybe
Yeah.
more interesting.
One big giant game, and we're all the players, and now AI is getting involved and shuffling the players around. I have one last question for you. Looking ahead, financial losses predicted to be, was it say $40 billion from companies expected to face AI-driven and sophisticated attacks by 2022. Uh, do you any thoughts on that particular statement?
Yeah, it's always hard to predict these really large astronomical numbers of how much fraud will be committed. But I think to me the more interesting point is why would someone not be using AI in 2027? So to me, it's such a multi-purpose tool. You can use it for everything from learning, adjusting, proofreading, brainstorming, looking at your victims, writing your code, cleaning up your code, refactoring it so it doesn't hit a signature. So to me, I think the statement is more is that everything like probably there's at some point in the attack chain there will be AI all over. And so I think that's something I think about a lot because I think a lot of times in cybersecurity we're very prone to thinking about risk and we should be. That is our whole whole sector. So we think a lot about like this could cause problems, but I also there's that balance where you're trying to like balance risk and opportunity. And I think a lot of the threat actors, and depending on their motivations, the a fraud person who's like new and just like spraying and praying and seeing like what lands is not thinking about the robustness and is this maintainable code or is what happens if I have a false positive in who I target. And so if the threat actors are going to be using AI to scale their operations and the personalization and the effectiveness and how targeted they are, we have to think a little bit about how we're going to defend against that. So that to me, I think a lot about we have a huge opportunity as defenders. We have the access to like non-jailbroken models with higher performance. We have a lot of data. If we scale our defenses, I think we have an incredible opportunity to actually make things more secure than they were. But it depends on how it plays out.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And, once again, it goes down that, we'll talk about curiosity. How curious are you with the answers that you're giving and then continue to make it? It's never going to be perfect, but along the way, you're going to get really, really good. Zara, any last points on AI that I may not have hit on? I may not have asked you some parting shots when it comes to AI.
I I think honestly you covered it all. I think from my perspective, it's just really interesting tracking how it can be used for both improving our defenses, how it's being used for crime, how we can use it for fun. I think it's
Yeah.
it's such a really exciting time, and in some ways, it feels like early days of the internet where there's so much opportunity and so much that's unknown. So I think honestly that's top of mind for me, and I would also encourage if anyone has not read the Anthropic Threat Intel report from
Yeah.
August, You should check that out because there's some really interesting stuff on Vibe ransomware that is I found really interesting.
That was a fascinating article. I'm so glad that you shared that with me. I've shared that with several folks, and even popped it into AI and let it do a quick video in Notebook LM for me. So, Zara, I am humbled. I am so appreciative that you've taken some time out of your day to have a conversation with me. Arun, thank you so much for letting me step in for you today, and to co-host your podcast. And with that, in the famous words of Pat McAfee, always give him credit whenever I do my sign off, same as him. Be a friend, tell a friend something nice. It just might change their life. Thank you very much for your time.